I really like this Beyond Creation album, Algorythm, from 2018, and in particular the title track, which has a million great riffs, like, for example, this one. And this one. But I'm going to talk today about this kind of sudden interlude here. It's a cool moment. The texture thins out and we get these spacious arpeggios that go back and forth between inversions of C minor 7 and B major 7. This is a really proggy thing to do with chords, because if you move between any minor chord and a major chord a half step below, you'll get this otherworldly sound because there's no diatonic collection that will accommodate all of these notes. Side note, there are a bunch of these configurations of two chords that won't fit into a single diatonic scale. I mentioned in the contortionist video that this happens anytime you move between major or minor chords whose roots are a major or minor third apart also. So there's your prog songwriting tip of the day. Do these kind of weird moves if you want chord progressions to sound proggy. But my attention was drawn to this riff not because of this, but because of how similar it sounds to another riff I know well. Did you catch it? Can you hear it? The moment I'm thinking of is from the Faceless's Autotheist Movement Suite near the end of Deconsecrate. I'll play them back to back. Before I go any further, I want to make it very clear that this is not a dig. I'm not accusing someone of stealing or copying or anything. It's possible it's a coincidence, but I think it's probably an intentional, self-conscious quote. I'm spending a whole video on this idea because this sort of thing is kind of rare in metal, or is it? And it brings up some interesting ideas about musical similarity, markedness, and various types of musical borrowing. The first is about what exactly the nature of musical similarity is anyway. The two sections are not exactly the same. This moment from the Faceless actually uses completely different chords. But other than the chords being different, there are so many similarities. Both sets of chords use these spread fifth voicings, and they both move the bass note of the chords by major third, tapping into this otherworldly harmonic language.
And it's actually much more specific than that, as this diagram shows a lot of the specific intervals at certain places in the chord are the same too.
And much more obviously, they have the same rhythm, the same contour, they both come as breaks in the texture. Heck, the solos over them even sound pretty similar. There's even what I think is a nod to the start of Autotheist Movement with the low piano notes at the start of the next track on the Beyond Creation album. Given all of this, I was honestly surprised to see that the chords actually aren't exactly the same. My brain recognized the start of a familiar pattern and filled in some details for me that weren't actually what I was hearing. Unfortunately, that's something that brains notoriously do in all sorts of situations. So yeah, I think this is kind of a clear-cut case of musical similarity because there's so much that's similar. It's very similar to the point of being like, yeah, that's a quote of this thing. But the thing is, there are all sorts of cases where the evidence is a little less overwhelming, and that's where you get music copyright lawsuits. So for example, the Katy Perry one, the Adam Neely has a good video about that. The Good For You, Misery Business one, the Ed Sheeran, Marvin Gaye one. There are lots of these. Here's one that's not a copyright case, but hinges on the same sort of thing. My bandmate Alex from Aphelion Entity wrote this really cool section. And I heard it and I immediately was like, I know that sounds so similar to some riff I know. And I like looked back through everything. I found out it was this artificial brain section that I was thinking of. He disagreed that they were similar like at all. And I don't think there's any real way to say whether either of us is right. There are so many variables, some of which, like rhythm and harmony, are relatively easy to talk about objectively, but aren't always as important as you'd think they would be. And then there are others, like texture, timbre, vibe, how all of these things interact, that are a lot harder to pin down. I don't know, what do you think? How similar are these riffs? Does it matter? I'll get to that in a sec. There are other reasons that musical similarity is difficult to untangle. I'll stick to one family of reasons, which I call the question of specificity. Basically, how much is a riff pointing to another specific riff versus how much is it just doing common genre things? If you said that every palm-muted riff was related to every other palm-muted riff, you'd be kind of right, but it wouldn't be a very meaningful thing to point out, because palm muting is like a metal guitar genre convention. You can also keep zooming in on this, looking at subgenre conventions, idiolects, which is like a band's specific unique style, and then go even further to references to specific songs, specific riffs. But in practice, it's hard to decide where one level of reference ends and another begins. So for example, in Algorythm, the question might be, are they just doing this common prog clean section chord thing, where you do these spread voicings that move between chords that can't exist in the same diatonic scale, or are they specifically referencing this other riff? And other than like talking to the band, and like you can't always take seriously what a band says about stuff like this for reasons that I'll get into in a sec, you know, how can we tell? How can we like adjudicate between, like, is this similar in a specific sense, or is it just similar in the sense that all tech death is kind of similar to itself? Music theorist Robert Hatton has written a lot about this and uses this concept of markedness to help kind of figure it out. Basically, choices that are more unusual but will be more marked for attention and have more potential to specify specific other things. It's above my pay grade, which is roughly $1 and a kick in the butt per video, to give an intro to musical signification in this video. But that's a place to start if you're interested in getting into the weeds of how music can mean things and whether a reference to something else is significant or not. So all of that is kind of to say that there's a whole bunch of ways that music can point outside of itself. It can point to genre, subgenre, a band-specific style. It can also borrow from outside genres. So think of like prog stuff where you have like a, I don't know, Between the Bear and Me has like a surf rock section in the middle of a song, whatever, stuff like that. It can also focus on specific typical musical tropes. So like the same riff but slower trope is like something that's going to reference all these other instances of that if you're familiar with them. And it's kind of this thing that a lot of bands do across subgenres, and they're all kind of referencing the same thing, and they're all linked, but they're also all, you know, kind of their own unique version of it. This area is kind of called topic theory, and it's another huge area of scholarship. It's like a way of putting musical quotation marks around something and being like, okay, we're doing this thing, we know it's a trope, but we're going to do it in this context because it kind of has this meaning that we're borrowing from all the other times you've heard it. And then of course you can also quote other specific pieces of music, like I think what's happening here. Quoting other specific pieces of music happens all the time in other genres, but it's pretty rare in metal, or is it? In jazz, you play on the same chord changes as other people on purpose all the time, And it's even super common to quote little bits of tunes or famous other solos in your own solo. In hip-hop, sampling and interpolating are all about reinterpreting and adding layers of meaning to existing music. There are lots of famous examples of this in classical music too. So the theme of the finale of Brahms's First Symphony is famously a reworking of the Ode to Joy theme from Beethoven's Ninth, for example. And there's kind of meaning in all of this borrowing, right? You pick specific samples because they maybe relate to the subject matter of your song, or maybe you're kind of trying to flip the meaning of them. The Dissect podcast, if you're familiar with that, is really good at like teasing that type of stuff apart and tracking down samples and all that stuff. In the Brahms example, people kind of have interpreted this as symbolizing his struggle to get out from under Beethoven's shadow. As I've said, this type of thing is much less common in metal, though. Or is it? Metal bands will sometimes do full cover songs and even full cover albums, but incorporating an overt quote of another song into your own song is much more rare. It isn't unheard of. So for example, Between the Buried and Me does all sorts of self-quoting, which I've talked about in some videos, and if you look through like Colors 2, it's like a ton of weird kind of transformed quotes of stuff from Colors 1. There's like this, just to name some kind of random examples, there's this weird little quote of Jingle Bells in the solo of Octavarium by Dream Theater. Which probably has something to do with being trapped inside an octavarium or whatever, I don't know. Here's an interpolation with different lyrics and stuff of the Radiohead song 2 + 2 = 5.
Are you such a dreamer to put the world to right?
In the Oceans song Catharsis of a Heretic.
I refuse to shroud my past. These walls in here wrote on the rest.
Which makes sense because the album is about being asked to disregard the evidence of one's senses during the heliocentric revolution. I'll put the whole chain of associations on screen in case you're not familiar with all of them. And here's a bonkers quote of a Björk song.
I love him, I love him, I love him, I love him.
In a Callous Dowboys song.
I love you, 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 I love you.
Which also probably means something beyond just being part of the general eclectic ADHD core aesthetic. But I don't know what it is. Maybe I'll make another video about that stuff at some point. And then I've also, like, personally, I've snuck little quotes of riffs that I care about a lot into my own music a few times. Anyone recognize this? But these metal on metal quotes seem to be less common. It's not really part of the metal ethos. Adam Neely has another good video about the ethics of fake guitar, where he talks a little about how ethics, including what types of borrowing are allowed, depend a ton on what genre world you're living in. I think metalheads tend to have a kind of classical work concept idea that they're writing stuff that's completely new and original and self-contained, and that's your job as a metal musician, is to write, this new masterpiece. This explains why my bandmate Lefty, Alex, we call him Lefty because he's left-handed and his last name is Lefterados, was kind of offended when I said that the riff he wrote sounded like another riff, and why I felt the need to make it clear right off the bat in this video that I wasn't accusing anyone of stealing anything. But this plays into my final point. I think that this focus on writing stuff that's completely new and original is kind of silly for a few reasons. One is that it's kind of impossible. As I've said, it's fuzzy to even tell how similar two pieces of music are anyway. And a corollary of this is that it's impossible to write something that's completely new, even at like a conceptual level. There's no hard line between something that is new and something that is not. But more importantly, it is simply not how music works. Music has meaning precisely because it has links to other music we've heard. People write music as an output of all the music that they've inputted, all the music that they've listened to. Everyone I've ever talked about who writes music will normally bring up their influences and even explicitly say something like, I started writing music by trying to copy this band I like. It's advice I got early on when someone told me to try to write an Origin song because that was the band that I liked the most at that time. And I did, and it ended up not really sounding like Origin, and it wasn't that good because it was the first thing I ever wrote. But eventually, by trying and failing to copy all these different influences, I wrote some stuff that kind of by accident sounded different enough that it was like, oh, I kind of like this. This is kind of maybe the sound that I like. And it's like, it's not uncommon to have bands that will write stuff and they'll be like, oh, this is the like suffocation part, this is this breakdown that's you know, inspired by Liege of Inveracity. Or like, oh, this is our gent part, this is, you know, I love this Meshuggah riff, here's a little section that sounds like that. So yeah, while overt quotes like this are kind of rare in metal, I think that they're actually just a slightly more pronounced version of the type of thing that all metal musicians do anyways. Something you kind of can't help doing if you're writing music. All right, so there's that thread tied up. Let's throw it in the garbage. The other thread is this idea that musical borrowing has meaning. It's a conscious choice to put this particular quote in this particular song. You're adding a layer of meaning to it by putting it in a new context and transforming it. There's the general sense in which this particular quote, the Beyond Creation quote, is homage. It's a way of owning and thanking even bands that were influential to you. I don't know this in particular about Beyond Creation, but I think it's hard to imagine a tech death band that was coming up in the 2010s that doesn't know and like the Faceless. It's also meaningful as a kind of Easter egg for tech death heads. I know when I first heard it, I was immediately hooked into trying to figure out where I had heard that before. The quote also makes sense musically here because it's this kind of sudden cooling off moment around where a bridge would typically be, which gives us a breather before the last burst of intensity. It also makes sense thematically in this particular song because that the Faceless album, Autotheism, is kind of a double entendre, as I understand it, about making machines God and also making the self God, while Algorythm is about the ascendance of an all-powerful algorithm, just based on scanning the lyrics. But when you quote something with changes, even subtle ones, this adds layers of meaning. The main difference I hear is that the Beyond Creation verse has some kind of smoother harmony. It's just major and minor 7th chords, while the version from the Faceless has major 7 sharp 11 chords, slightly kind of denser chord choices. If I were in an interpretive mood, I might say that the smoother harmony of the Beyond Creation version is in line with a perpetual streamlining implied by the Algorythm, in contrast to the messy, multivalent, self-deifying message of autotheism. I don't know, you got any interpretations? You really should check out the rest of this Beyond Creation album. I feel a little bad because I didn't spend as much time as usual on the notes themselves, but that whole album is tech death gold. All right, well, there you go. There's another video that was supposed to be short, sweet, and simple that somehow turned into a 2,000 word script and probably, what, like 20 minutes? Are you happy? See ya.